Okay, so this is our second shiur of the current series. We're on volume 16, learning Hilchot Shabbat. As we announced, today the shiur is on Wednesday. From next week, the shiur is going back to Sundays by popular demand and popular request. So that's just a technical housekeeping announcement. So we are learning Hilchot Shabbat. So we began the first shiur last week. We're going to continue with the halachot of Erev Shabbat, preparation for Shabbat, etc., things like that. Last week we won't discuss again the idea of 3 days before Shabbat, the limitation of going on a ship, traveling, different applications of that. We started to talk a little bit about preparations for Shabbat, which we'll go into more detail today. We saw the machloket between Hillel and Shammai as to the best way to do things, whether Hillel and Shammai each had a different practice, where one would, every time throughout the week, if you would come across a choice item or something good, he would say, this will leave for Shabbat. That was Shammai. Hillel had a different way. He said, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, and every day, whatever he got, he said, Hashem will provide something greater for Shabbat as well. So picking up from there, let's begin on page 39. Page 39. The last thing we discussed as well was the takana of Ezra of washing clothes on Shabbat. I won't repeat that, but I refer you to the books if you missed last week's shiur. So page 39 talks about, again, preparations on Erev Shabbat. As we all know, there are many preparations that need to be done. Chazal tell us, Misha Toreach, Erev Shabbat yochal b'Shabbat, in terms of cooking, in terms of cleaning, in terms of buying the food, etc. We spoke last week at the end as well a little bit about the spiritual preparations of Shabbat. So the Mishnah Berurah as well, who talks about how important it is, not just the technicalities, but in terms of making ourselves ready to receive Shabbat. Maybe we'll talk a bit more about that as well. But so if you see source number 26, page 39, this is the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat. Amar Rav Chisda, לעולם ישכים אדם להוצאת שבת, שנאמר והיה ביום השישי והכינו את אשר יביאו לאלתר. So based on this pasuk in the Midbar, which is really referring to the man, where it says והיה ביום השישי והכינו את אשר יביאו, it says they would prepare that which they had brought, talking about collecting of the man on early on Friday morning. In terms of Shabbat, so Rav Chisda learns from he said leolam yashkim adam lehotzat Shabbat. A person should wake up early in order to get ready all the things which one needs to collect, one needs to get for Shabbat. The phrase here yashkim is very interesting and it's very significant, and we'll see what it means. The Gemara is going to tell us. The poskim will say when it says here yashkim adam baboker, what does it mean? You should get up early in the morning. Talking about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, or is it referring to something else? Maybe that's not so early. But Rashi says here, right, source number 27, Hechinu et asher yaviu la'altar, b'shat hava'a hachana. At the time when they would bring it, time they would collect the man, that was the time of preparation. V'hava'a b'ashkamai. And when would they collect it? When would the man fall? That was early, first thing in the morning. V'yokatu oto baboker. Says the Shulchan Aruch, source number 28, Siman Reish Nun, Yashkim baboker b'yom shishi la'achin tzorchei Shabbat. So a person should arise early in the morning to prepare things for Shabbat. So the poskim discuss, what does it mean, arise early in the morning? It means, even though when you wake up, the first thing that a person should do when they wake up is check their phone. No, really, the first thing that a person should do when we wake up, we come to daven Shachrit, say Kriyat Shema. Person is not allowed to engage in their personal activities prior to what's called Cheftei Shamayim, prior to davening and things like that. By the way, interesting shaila which comes up, poskim discuss, is a person. There's even a halacha about regarding greeting somebody in the morning, saying shalom, which is the name of Hashem. Is it appropriate to use that name before a person has davened, or at least before a person has said brachot? Things like that. So, certainly writing a letter to a friend or engaging in social activity before davening is incorrect. Poskim discuss, is a person allowed to check their messages? Is a person allowed to take out their phone and get a conversation on social media, whatever, before davening? It's not so straightforward. It's not so straightforward that would be permitted. But in any event, getting ready for Shabbat and getting the shopping and getting one's needs is so important, is so significant. And as we'll see, it is not for our honor, but it is for Hashem's honor, it is for the honor of Shabbat. Therefore, that is something that could even take precedence over davening. If a person is in a situation whereby the only way you're going to go, by the time you go to davening, and you're going to go buy the challahs afterwards, they'll already be sold out, So you can go by the challahs before you daven. Have a look at the Mishnah Berurah, source number 29. So this is on page 40. He says, Yashkim baboker, haynu miyad achrei kriyat shema tefillah. So it should be immediate. First thing you do after kriyat shema and davening. Ach imul agil elmod achar tefillah is a shul katzuv. So what if you have a shiur, a regular shiur that you have on a Friday morning, Parshat Shavua, whatever it is, or you have a chavrota at that time, or shlomedim rabim, al yivat lehna. So don't cancel that fixed learning that you should do. Ve'im derech hamakom ha'olim kol baboker. But if you're in a place whereby they sell things in the morning, ve'lo yimtza liknot achar limudo, and you're going to go to your shiur, you're not going to have time. Afterwards, everything will be sold out. So lo yikba limudo el achar kniya. So you should establish your chavrota to go shopping first, and then go and get, and once you have that ready, then go learn. What if you're in a place where there's the shuk that opens and they sell things very, very early? Amazing. He says, if you will be unable to purchase the goods for Shabbat after davening, doesn't mean you daven at the 10 o'clock minyan. It means that, right? But it's just very early. So go first, buy what you need for davening, buy what you need for Shabbat, and then go davening. Even though ordinarily nothing comes, we say you have to daven first. This is so important, you can do that prior. That's the Mishnah Berurah. Make sure you say Kriyat Shema first. The time may pass, you may miss the mitzvah. Since that is the time of its mitzvah, and you should do that. So says the Mishnah Berurah. This does not fall into the category, what we say, person cannot engage in their own needs and their own interests prior to davening. That getting ready for Shabbat, it's not your needs. This is cheftzei shamayim. This is the interest of heaven. So the Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata, source number 30. Here at the top of the next page. So there's an interesting discussion amongst the poskim, which is, we saw this a little bit last week when we discussed washing. Ezra made a takana that a person should wash their clothes on Thursday. Ordinarily, we say the more that, we'll see the Shmirat Shabbat as well. Many of the poskim write, the more that you can do for Shabbat on Erev Shabbat, it's better to do it on Friday. Why? Because then it's more recognizable that you're doing it Lichvot Shabbat. Obviously, when there's a lot to do, I think nowadays we probably have a lot more to do than they did once upon a time, but it's different. Once upon a time, they had less food. They weren't doing the cooking and the washing, whatever. It was much more time consuming, but now it's done in a different way. If you're going to be leaving everything to the last minute and you're going to be stressed and you're going to be running into Shabbat and things are, there's going to be tension throughout the house. So obviously, do it earlier. You can do it before, but it needs to be done in a way that it's recognizable. That it is for Shabbat, that it's Lichvot Shabbat. I'm not just tidying the house because I'm a neat freak. I'm doing it because this is covered Shabbos. So the Yavetz, Yaakov Emden says, he's regarding washing, we saw it was done on Thursday. He says, shouldn't we say that it should be done on Friday? So we discussed last week in terms of contemporary, when you can do it. I'm not talking about washing now, but he gives two answers over there. He says, number one, where it's a very long and time-consuming activity, so then you can do it earlier. That's number one. He says, number two, where we're talking about washing one's clothes, so you're going to have washed clothes which you wear on Shabbat. So it's clear and it's obvious to everybody that this is part of Kavod Shabbat. So the point is that the general principle is the closer we can do something to Shabbat in a normal way that's not going to cause tension, it should be recognizable that it's done lechavod Shabbat. So says the Shmirat Shabbat number 30. He says, Mutav liknot tzorchei Shabbat be'erev Shabbat miliknotam b'yom chamishi. So it's preferable to make purchases on Erev Shabbat rather than Thursday. By purchasing it closer to Shabbat, it's clear that it's the honor of Shabbat. I think you asked me about this last week, that when you make the purchase, say this is Lechavot Shabbat. Right? But now what are we talking about? Things that don't need a lot of preparation. You're talking about maybe the challah, the grape juice, whatever it is. Drinks maybe. But things that need a preparation. You want to do all your cooking on Thursday night and Wednesday night, whatever it is. You need to buy the meat and you need to buy the chicken, you need to buy the potatoes. You're going to say, no, I'll wait till Friday morning to buy the potatoes. So I've stacked the whole of Friday cooking. No, that's obviously not necessary. זה כמו בשר ודגים, מוטב לקנותם ביום חמישי בשבת, buy them on Thursday, כדי שיהיה לו פנאי לטרוח בערב שבת, בהכנתם להתעסק בשאר צורכי השבת. In order that you'll have time to prepare them and do everything else you need to do for Shabbat. And obviously, you're talking about going to the supermarket, whatever, you need to do it earlier in the week. That can be done earlier in the week as well. I think I would add, nowadays, I think it's very clear to everybody, if you go to the supermarket on Thursday night, anybody's had that unfortunate experience, right? It's clear that people are doing their shopping for Shabbos. It's not things have changed. It's not that everybody goes on Friday morning. Everybody goes on Thursday night. You can see that Thursday night just as much as Friday is Lechavot Shabbat, and one doesn't need to be concerned about this. And again, if one needs to do it earlier in the week, that is fine as well. I want to skip. We'll come back to this, but if we go to page 57 for a moment, so at the end of each of these shiurim, we have the halachic sources. There are some machshava sources as well, which are related to our topic. So again, this goes back to David's question from last week. So the Shulchan Aruch Harav, source number 67, he says, Yatov lamar al kol davar shekoneh zeu lechvod Shabbat. Anytime you go, you make a purchase for Shabbat. This is lechavod Shabbos Kodesh. V'chen b'chol ma she'oseh, tov lachshov she'oseh lechvod Shabbat. Not just that which you buy, but whatever you do, whatever you prepare to say that is for the honor of Shabbat. He quotes on source number 68. He says, "B'kol asher yaseh b'yom yom hashishi, hen b'tzorchei Shabbat, hen b'chitza, mabush." Whatever you do on Friday, Erev Shabbat, whether it's cooking, whether it's washing, whether it's one's clothes. Yomah b'piv, she'oseh lechvod Shabbat Kodesh. So maybe that's again to what we said before. If you want everything to be recognizable that it's for Shabbat on Friday afternoon, it's Friday morning, it's going to be a bit stressful. So go shopping on Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it is, and say Lichvot Shabbat. Then you know, and it's clear what one's intention is for. The Piskei Tshuvot, source number 69, says that there's an advantage to this when we are conscious and we're aware. Now, we have a principle, which is, he doesn't quote this yet, but we have a principle throughout Shas, mitzvot tzrichot kavanah. Person does a mitzvah, one has to have intention, one has to be thinking about what one is doing. So same too, maybe we could say here, that the preparation needs intent as well. He says, whatever a person does in preparing for Shabbat, clearing the house and changing one's clothes, etc. One could say that he's doing it for Shabbat. This is the machshava section of the halacha section, by the way. So this is not a chiyuv, but this is something which can help one and can permeate the holiness of Shabbat. Please think about it. Through that, the holiness of Shabbat will permeate throughout everything that one is doing. We discussed this last week. As well. Over the page, on page 58, you see number 71. Rav Soloveitchik would speak about this in a few places as a beautiful concept. He says, true, there are Jews in America who observe Shabbat, but it's not for Shabbat that my heart aches. It is for the forgotten Erev Shabbat. Rav Soloveitchik. There's books over there if you want. There are Shabbat observing Jews in America, but there are no Erev Shabbat Jews who go out to greet Shabbat with beating hearts, pulsating souls. There are many who observe the precepts with their hands, with their feet, or with their mouths, but there are few indeed who truly know the meaning of the service of the heart. Soloveitchik, it's not enough to be a Shomer Shabbat Jew, we have to be a Shomer Erev Shabbat Jew as well. Beautiful idea. I think in this neighborhood, you really do get a sense of it. You know, if you walk out Friday morning, Shari Chesed, you feel it's not Friday, it's Erev Shabbat. It's something different, and it's something, there's a Rav who has a shiur, very popular on YouTube. He sends out every week. It's called Turn Friday into Erev Shabbos. Right? It's not Friday, it's Erev Shabbos, and that changes the way that one acts, that changes the way that one feels about Erev Shabbat. It changes the way one feels about Shabbat as well. He writes again, you can see source 72 and 73, Rabbi Hillel Goldberg, who writes the following example. He says he remembers Rabbi Soloveitchik saying in one of his lectures, words to this effect: person works Friday until the last moment. He speeds home, arriving 15 minutes before candlelighting, then jumps into the shower, back into the car, speeds to shul, just in time for the beginning of Mincha. This isn't Shabbos. Holiness requires preparation. In Chutz La'aretz, this is a lot trickier, where Friday is a normal work day and people are working maybe till the last minute, especially in the winter. You know, when Shabbat comes in, 3, 4 o'clock, it's very, very difficult. I mean, in Israel, we're fortunate in this regard. Like I say, it's not Friday, it's Erev Shabbos. Some people work. We'll talk in a few moments about Melacha as well. Melacha on Erev Shabbat, what limitations there are to that. So back on page 41, the Mishnah Berurah brings here not only shopping for Shabbat, but tasting the Shabbat foods. He says, mitzvah lit'om mikol tavshil be'erev Shabbat, kedei l'taknan yafeh kol gen. Very difficult halacha to follow, but says the Mishnah Berurah, it's a mitzvah. Every dish that you're cooking, taste it for Shabbat. There are interesting discussions actually in the poskim. What happens when there's a fasting? If you're on Fridays, I think it falls out this year. I think right, Asara B'Tevet, which is in our calendar the only fast that falls out on Friday. So there are discussions over there. Would this supersede the fasting in terms of tasting the food for Shabbat? Answer is no, it does not. But in any event, there's a mitzvah. It's not just tasting, but this is part of the hachana, part of the preparation for Shabbat. And on page 42, you see the Gemara goes into very great lengths to explain to us how important it is that one should personally be involved in the preparation for Shabbat. Everybody should find something, even if you're the person at home who doesn't normally do the cooking or the cleaning or whatever. Every person should find something to do. We're going to talk about in the upcoming Shiurim Adlakat Nerot, lighting candles. So we know that lighting candles for Shabbat is the woman's mitzvah. The poskim writes, so the husband should prepare the candles in the morning, maybe even Friday morning, in order to have a part in that mitzvah, part of the preparation. Okay, I'm not getting into Shalom Bayit issues. Yeah, the candles are one of the reasons why Adlakat Nerot is Shalom Bayit. So let's not make things complicated. But anyways, so the Mishnah in Masechet Kiddushin, we mentioned this briefly last week. Source number 32 tells us Ha'ish Makadesh Bo Bishlucho. That's the Mishnah, the second parak of Kiddushin, talking about how Kiddushin can be affected personally by oneself or via a shaliach. And then the Gemara tells us, if it can be done via shaliach, why does the Mishnah have to say bo? The Mishnah said, Aish Makadesh, bo ubishlucho. He can do it himself, and he can do it via shaliach. If you can do it via shaliach, via proxy, obviously you can do it yourself. Why does the Mishnah have to tell us that? Answers the Gemara, Marav Yosef mitzvah bo yoter mi bishlucho. Because even though it could be done via shaliach, I don't recommend to anybody nowadays performing Kiddushin via shaliach, but it's a greater mitzvah for you to perform it yourself. And the Gemara extends this. Fascinating. The Gemara only mentions this principle in the context of two mitzvot. The poskim discussed. Does it apply to other mitzvot as well? Maybe yes, maybe not. But certainly by Kiddushin, there's a principle that it's a greater mitzvah for one to do it personally rather than rely on a shaliach. The other mitzvah, where it's greater for you to do it yourself rather than via a shaliach, is getting ready for Shabbat. What Shabbat? And it says, the Gemara gives many examples. We just read two. Ki had Rav Safra machrich reisha, Rava malech shibuta. Right, Rav Safra would singe the head of the animal that they were cooking for Shabbat. Rava would salt the fish. And the Gemara goes on, it gives other examples. Shulchan Aruch, have a look, 35, the bottom of page 43. Source 35 in the Shulchan Aruch. He says, Yashkim aboker b'yom shishi lachin solchei Shabbat. As we've seen already, a person should early on Friday morning begin preparing for Shabbat. Afilu yesh lo kama avadim l'shamsho. Even if he has servants who can do it for him. Nonetheless, yishtadel lachin ba'atzmo shum davar letzorchei Shabbat kedei lechabdo. You should try and do something yourself in order to prepare for Shabbat. Ki Rav Chisda yamachatecha yelek dakdak. Rav Chisda would chop up the vegetables. Rav Yosef ayumavakinetzim. Rabbi and Rav Yosef would chop the firewood. Rabbi Zera yamad lekaesh. Rabbi Zera would light the fire. Rav Nachman yamad taken abayit. Rav Nachman would clean the house. Right? We're not used to thinking of the Tanaim and Amoraim in these terms, but that's what they would do. That is the honor of Shabbat. A person should not say, and he goes on. He says, "Mehem yamad kol adam." The last few lines, "Lo yamar lo afgom kvodi." If this was so, it was for the great sages. Person shouldn't say it's below my honor. I think nowadays it's probably more commonplace that more people are engaged in these kind of activities. Maybe going back a few generations, where people would say it's not, it's beneath me to go now and sweep the house or whatever it is. No. Your honor is the fact that you are able to honor Shabbat. There's a story which is told, after sharing this context. Story is told of Rav Gifta. As Rosh Hashanah tells that there was an avrech in the yeshiva who got married, and the young couple were having a fight. That he was an avrech, and he was sitting and he was learning all day, and he said it's beneath my Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, it's beneath my dignity to take out the garbage. And I don't know, it was too heavy or whatever. And the wife asked him to take out the garbage. He said, no, it's not appropriate for somebody who's a Torah scholar to take out the garbage, trash, rubbish, whatever you call it. And so he went to ask, she went to ask, they went to the Rosh Hashiva, and they said, is there a halacha in Shulchan Aruch that obligates him to listen to his wife and take out the garbage? They said, there's no halacha. So they went home. Next morning, early in the morning, there's a knock on the door. It's the Rosh Hashiva. Rosh Hashiva of Gifta, please come in, sit down, have a seat. He says, no, I came to take out the garbage. Beneath your honor, it's not beneath mine. Okay, I think after that, he took out the garbage. But that's where we see that these things, it's not, a person should not say, this is beneath me, right? This is something which is appropriate, and that is the mitzvah, and that is something someone should be doing. The Shara Tzion questions, he says, what about when we say, we'll get back to this idea of the honor, but this idea of mitzvah bo yoter bishlucho, right? If it could be, not because a person refuses, but somebody else is able to do the preparations. Why does if a person is sitting and learning, we have the Gemara Megillah and other places, there's a whole sugya. If there's a mitzvah that can be performed by other people, so then you don't have to stop your learning to go and do it. It's something that somebody else can do. Why should I have to stop? More important, I carry on learning. So the Shara Tzion here says the following, in source number 34. He says, we don't say here, we do not apply the principle of something that could be done by somebody else, and therefore we don't stop learning even for a short time. Why? He says the dafka, he gives two answers. Answer number one is this, in bold. Yesh lomar, the dafka mitzvah she'en mutelet al gufo. We say you can rely on somebody else to perform a mitzvah where the result needs to be achieved by somebody, but it's not that it's not that the mitzvah is incumbent upon me to perform. So first option we could say is that kavod Shabbat mutelet al gufo. It's incumbent upon him. It's incumbent upon each and every individual. I have to honor the Shabbat, and therefore I have to stop learning to do something. We're not saying you have to be in the kitchen for 12 hours, but you have to take part. You have to do something. Number two, says inami, the davka lenyan kvod Shabbat amuinan ken dechamila. So maybe not that it's a person incumbent upon you, but kavod Shabbat is something that is so weighty, that is so significant, that we say yes, for this, even a person should take some time out of their learning in order to prepare. We've seen already that kavod Shabbat you could do it before davening, so too you could something that could take some precedence over one's learning. Over the page, we see the Mishnah Berurah, source number 36. He says, Mehem yamot kol adam, again referring to the idea that we learned from the Tanaim and Amoraim, that every person should be involved somehow in the preparations for Shabbat. He says, Ainu afilu hachashuv beyater, even important people, distinguished people. Uvifrat beyamim haketzarim, mikol sheken ksheroeh shekvar hu samuch leShabbat, she'az hu mechuyav la'asok b'chol kocho. He says this is particularly true during the winter, when Friday is very short, and there's not so much time, and it's not so clear that it can be done without you. They need your help as well, so you should be involved. He says, Ra'iti anshe ma'aseh gdolei Torah. The Mishnah Berurah says, I saw great people, I saw great gdolei Torah, shemachabdin habayit, would sweep the house, b'atzman b'yamim haketzarim. They would sweep the house themselves on the short days in the winter, if they did it in summer as well. But kadei shelo yitchalel Shabbat, that it should not come to a situation of chilul Shabbat. V'zeu chiyuv gamur al kol adam. This is an absolute obligation on every individual. Says, what difference does it make if there is no shaliach or the shaliach doesn't have time? It needs to get done, and therefore you should help and you should do it. Interesting historical tidbit over here is the Aruch HaShulchan, who lived more or less the same time as the Mishnah Berurah. Aruch HaShulchan says, in our days we see there are many people who are not engaged in the Shabbat preparation, like we've said. Why is that? He says, he says or maybe that's not the way we've seen, but maybe from the fact that the Gemara emphasizes that you have to do it, we can infer that there are people who were not engaged in this way. So he says, hidur mitzvah, this is a hidur mitzvah. Etzlenu nashotenu osot mechinot ba'atzman nechvod Shabbat v'ishto kagufo. So says the Aruch HaShulchan, in his days, that the men were not so engaged in the Shabbat preparations. He says, from a halachic standpoint, we could say that maybe ishto kagufo, that they are their representatives and they are doing it on their behalf. But as we've seen already, Mishnah Berurah, the Shulchan Aruch, the Gemara, many sources are very, very clear that everybody should be involved in this preparation. The Biur Halacha, which of course was written by the Chafetz Chaim, along with the Mishnah Berurah and the Sharat Tziyun, all the same author. He writes, he references the biblical story of David HaMelech. David HaMelech dancing in front of the Aron Kodesh, and then he's told, how are you doing this? This is a bizayon. It's not fitting for the honor of the king. David HaMelech says, this is the honor. This is the honor of Hashem, and therefore the fact that I am disgracing myself, so to speak, that is Hashem's honor. In the same way, that's what one should understand, that when engaging in this Kavod Shabbat, that is the honor of Hashem. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
The owner of this house or the head of this house, and you make a kiddush.
Yes.
The other people don't make a kiddush. Is that the Shalia?
Yeah. Okay. So the question was asked. So that's a different. Here we're talking about Kavod Shabbat preparing. You're asking about kiddush. If one person, the Balabayit, makes kiddush on behalf of everybody, would we call it a shaliach? So exactly what we call it, shaliach or shomea koheneh. Exactly what mechanism is unclear. Or maybe midin arvut. Essentially, we have a din of arvut, which says that all of Am Yisrael are responsible for one another, which is the reason why that even if a person has made kiddush themselves, they can go and make kiddush for somebody else. So yes, one person says it on behalf of everybody else. We'll get there when we get to Hilchot Kiddush. I'm not sure if it's. I think the last Shiur in this volume is a Hilchot Kiddush, and then in volume 17 we'll continue. So hold tight, we'll get there. Okay, now that we've prepared for Shabbat on Friday, we've cooked all the food for Shabbat. The question is, what about eating on Erev Shabbat, eating a meal on Friday? And here we find somewhat of a contradiction in the Gemara. This, by the way, this comes up. This is very relevant when in different circumstances. Ordinarily, an ordinary Friday, so a person has a little bit to eat. One's not required to fast on Friday, unless it's a Asar B'Tevet. In fact, it's better not to fast on Friday. A person shouldn't come into Shabbat, completely famished. But we're talking about in terms of having a big meal, sometimes you have a Brit Milah or a Pidyon Haben or something like that, maybe a wedding on a Friday, right? That's going to be a question. Sometimes when you have, in Chutz La'aretz, it's more common, but it can come up. If we have Yom Tov and Shabbat, which are samuch to one another, consecutive, or the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, because these dinim would apply on Friday, they would apply regarding Shabbat, would apply regarding Yom Tov as well. The Gemara is going to tell us that we shouldn't eat a meal, we shouldn't eat a big meal too close to Shabbat, in order that one comes into Shabbat with an appetite. So what happens if you have, same thing would be Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah, as it was this year. First day of Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbat. So you have to have Surah Shlishit already. How late in the day can you have Surah Shlishit? Because you have to be still be somewhat hungry, which is a challenge at the best of times, the second day Yom Tov. Right? So that's where these halachot come up, are very practical. So source number 39 is the Gemara in Masechet Pesachim, beginning of Avei Pesachim. It says, the Tanya, Lo yochel adam b'avei Shabbatot v'yamim tovim min ha-mincha u'lemala. Person should not eat. We have to discuss what not eat means. It doesn't mean literally you can't eat anything, but it says on Erev Shabbat in Yom Tov, from mincha time and onwards. We have to understand what mincha time means. There are two possibilities what mincha time means. But why? The reason is, Kadei sheikanesh leShabbat kshu ta'ava. You need to enter Shabbat when you are hungry. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi omer ochel v'olech ad shtechshach. Rabbi Yossi says Rabbi Yossi says you can carry on eating until nightfall. We actually probably paskin like Rabbi Yossi, not like Rabbi Yehuda, so that we can continue eating. However, the Gemara here in Masechet Gittin, source number 40, I won't read it inside, but it says that there was a certain family in Jerusalem that was uprooted because very bad things happened to them. Why? Because they would have their meal, they would establish, we're on page 46, they would establish their set meal on Erev Shabbat. So, Paschanak Rabbi Yossi says you can eat on Erev Shabbat whenever you want, but the Gemara says no, there was a problem with eating on Erev Shabbat. So,
they made a big meal, and then they made kiddush when they came home from Friday night davening.
I don't know exactly what that. Presumably they had kiddush and they what they did on Shabbat, the Gemara doesn't tell us, but they had a big meal on Friday, which was incorrect. So Rashi says here, why? He says that it's not proper to enter Shabbat completely satiated. You have a Shabbat meal, you're meant to enjoy it. So says the Rambam, source number 42. He says, "Asur likboa seuda u'mishteh Erev Shabbat b'pnei kvod Shabbat." So this is how the poskim understand that essentially we can divide eating into three categories. The first category is what the Rambam writes here, likboa seuda mishteh, to have a feast. That's what they would do. This family every Friday they would have a big feast. That is completely inappropriate. That is forbidden. That is never allowed. However, he says, "Mutar le'achol v'lishtot ad shtechshach." Right, just to eat and drink, just to have snacks, small things to eat. That is okay until nightfall. V'af al pichen, nonetheless, mikvod Shabbat shimena adam min hamincha ulemala milikboa seuda. Okay, so this is the third category, which is likboa seuda, which means to have a meal, to have it doesn't mean a feast necessarily, but a meal maybe a bit larger than what you'd normally have. That should not happen. A fixed meal that a person should not do from mincha time and onwards, in order that you enter Shabbat with an appetite. Was there a question? No. Okay. So what we said, one of the things was from mincha time. Mincha can either be referring to what's called mincha ktana or mincha gdola. Mincha gdola is from 6.5 hours, half an hour after halachic midday. Mincha ktana is after 9.5 hours. It's a bit later. Many of the poskim say we're talking about 9.5 hours. That is mincha ktana. So that is from that time. One should not have a meal. You can see maybe here on page 48 in the yellow box gives us more or less the summary. Number one, if there is a meal that is exceptionally larger, right, a feast, that's forbidden all day. That's what the Gemara in Zechah Gittin told us about. Number two is a regular meal, so that one can have in the morning, but from the 9th halachic hour, from a mincha ktana, that one should not have. And as I said, this gets a bit tricky when it's Sudash Lishit and 2 days of Yom Tov, things like that. Number three, snacks and a small meal that one can have at any point in the day, but again, in a way that one is still going to have an appetite for Shabbat. This obviously depends on the person. There are some people who can eat all day and carry on eating all night, and there are some people for whom it's a bit more challenging. So, what about a Seudat mitzvah? So if you have a Seudat mitzvah, that is its appropriate time, which is on Friday, that is okay. Better to do it in the morning, to do it earlier. It needs to be before the 9th hour of the day, but that's generally the way it's done. And there's a bris we try and do in the morning anyway, because of the reason Maktimina mitzvot. Poskim point out, even if it's been postponed, right, the bris, if it's on the 8th day, the bris is on Friday, certainly one can do that. If it has been postponed, and can you postpone it to a Friday? You should still do the Brit Milah as early as possible, but you can still have the meal. Have a look, source number 48. The Mishnah Berurah here talks about Brit Milah. He says, even if the Brit is not taking place on the 8th day, the child was ill, whatever reason, we still say this is the time, because the kol shata v'shata zmaneu tasur lanichal afilu yom echad. Once the Brit has been postponed, there is an incumbent obligation to have it as soon as you can. Every day, there is still an obligation of that child to have the Brit Milah, and therefore, the earliest possible opportunity that comes up, that is on Friday, that is, even though it's postponed, that is considered the time, and you can have the Seudat mitzvah there. Poskim talk about, could you have it says Shiur Masechet. You do a Shiur Masechet and have the Seudat mitzvah on Friday morning. Some say yes, some say no, because that you could do anytime. Regarding the Brit, by the way, this interesting question that comes up, based on the fact that it's postponed. Let's say you have two babies. You say you have a mole who has to do a Brit Milah for two babies. One is on the 8th day, and one which has been postponed. Right? So which one comes first? So there are those who say, well, the 8th day, that's the time, that has to come first. There are those who say, no, the one that's been postponed, the longer you leave it, the longer you have the obligation. So it's not our subject right now, but it's just an interesting side point. As you can imagine, there's machloket and different opinions in terms of what should be done there. We just mentioned something which is, I think in recent years has become a bit more popular as well, which is the idea of weddings on a Friday. In the days of the Gemara, they used to have their weddings on Friday as well, but then the meal would be at night, meaning the Friday night meal. That was so poor to have a Shabbat meal and a wedding meal as one. People couldn't afford more. I heard a story that Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach got married. It was Friday and it was Purim. So they had the Surah of the wedding, of Shabbat, and of Purim all in one, because they couldn't afford to have more meals than that. Okay, so things have changed. So there's no question you can have the meal on the Friday night. The question, what's done nowadays, is to have one Friday morning. So this fits into exactly what we've said. Having a larger meal than normal on a Friday, is it permitted? So we saw by Brit Milah and these other cases that the poskim say, if it's a, because this probably fits into, again, the first category of meals, right, which is something which is much larger than one normally has. I mean, depending what kind of weddings you go to, I don't know, but most people don't on a standard Tuesday night have the meal that they would have at a wedding. So can you have it in the morning? So the truth is that the Shulchan Aruch says, that one is allowed to have. We don't have these sources in front of us. This is from a summary I'm taking here from Rabbi Mon's book on Hilchot Shabbat. But Shulchan Aruch says that on a Friday, you can have erusin is permitted. You can have the wedding there, and you could have the meal. Well, there's discussion about two different ways to understand it. There are those who say that you can have the wedding on Friday, but you should not have the meal on Friday. That is how Rav Ovadia understands, how he understands the Shulchan Aruch, that because Friday is not appropriate to have a larger meal than usual, then the meal should take place later. There are those who say no. What it means is, Magen Abraham understands like this, that the wedding can take place on Friday. What we say, is based on the Yerushalmi, that says don't have the meal on Friday, means if the erusin took place previously and you're delaying the meal, then don't have it on Friday. But if the erusin, which is the kiddushin, which takes place under the chuppah, that is taking place on Friday itself, then one is allowed to have the meal then, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. He says Ikar Adin. He says the letter of the law is like this opinion. He says lekatchila, better not to, says the Mishnah Berurah. But nowadays, practically speaking, many do allow it. The Rabbanut Rashid does allow weddings on Fridays. Interestingly, that there are some conditions. It says here that the regulations of the Rabbanut Rashid are that if there is a chuppah on a Friday, so it has to be done before 12 o'clock in the winter and before 1 o'clock in the summer, and the final dessert has to be served by 3 hours before Knesset Shabbat. So that's the mashgiach is standing there with his watch and checking. That's but the bottom line is that is permitted. One can and that is done. That's how one is allowed to have a wedding and a suda on a Friday. What? No, you can start earlier. It has to be by 12. You don't have to wait till the last minute. Start at 8 o'clock, straight after Shachrit. Okay. What about performing? So the last topic we'll discuss today, last two topics: performing Melacha and traveling on Friday. Now, the term Melacha is a little bit of a difficult one, because we know Melacha means there are 39 categories of Melacha that cannot be performed on Shabbat, but we do find Melacha in the sense of work in different times that it's brought in the Gemara. So when we talk about Melacha now, we mean Melacha in the sense of work, or maybe things which would take a long time, might take some expert thing. We don't mean the same Melacha, on Shabbat. You can't turn on a light switch because that's Melacha. That's not the Melacha we're talking about on Friday afternoon. Similar discussion by Chol HaMoed, by Erev Pesach, etc. But the Gemara says, Gemara Pesachim, page 50, source 49. It says, Tanya oseh melacha b'avei Shabbatot v'yamim tovim min hamincha u'lama'ala ein ro'eh siman melacha le'olam. A person who performs, you see here it's translated as labor. A person who performs Melacha on Erev Shabbat and Yom Tov from Mincha time and onwards will not see. It doesn't say it's forbidden, but it says you won't see a sign of blessing, meaning it's not appropriate. So as we mentioned already, Mincha can refer to Mincha Gdola or Mincha Ktana. There's a bit of a machloket over here as to which one it is. What are we, however, talking about? So the Ramah in source number 54 says, Dafka k'shoseh melacha derech kevon. When we're talking about melacha done in a fixed way, aval im oserta derech arai, something which is in an offhand manner. Lefi sha'a v'lo kava aleh. You don't establish you were going to sit and doing this for a long time. That would be allowed. Lachein mutar lichtov igeret shlomim v'chol kayotze bazeh. So letters of personal correspondence, etc. He allows. The Yalkut Yosef, source number 55, gives some examples as well. He says, Kol zek shoseh melacha derech keva, aval mutar la'asot melacha derech harai, kegon nichtov igeret lechavero, as the Ramah said. or litfor kaftor b'vigdor, right? Not so to sit and sew an entire garment, that would be melacha derech keva, that would be forbidden. But button fell off, you just want to sew it back, that is okay. So it's clearly related, but it's not. But it's not just referring to. Meaning there are certain melachot of those 39 that would be permitted. Again, the emphasis here is on sort of work that is going to be that's going to be time consuming. Let me read to you something from the Pnei Halacha. It's not in the book in front of you, but I think it helps to understand this. Pnei Halacha, which is Rabbi Eliezer Melamed. So he says as follows. First of all, the reason for this, why are we saying not to perform melacha? So the understanding is, one is you may get drawn into whatever activity it is. You won't have time to prepare for Shabbat adequately, and you'll be stuck doing this. And therefore, it detracts from kavod Shabbat in that what needs to be done for Shabbat won't get done because you're doing something else. So we say stop before. It's also about in terms of preparing our mindset, as we discussed previously. Even if, Poskim will say, even if a person has done everything for Shabbat, the table is set, the food is cooked, the house is ready, everything is some miracle, right? 3 hours before Shabbat, everything is done. Nonetheless, person should still not be doing these things because it still detracts from kavod Shabbat. The person needs to get into the right frame of mind and the right preparation. But says like this, says Rav Melamed in the Pnei Halacha, which is not in front of you. He says, "Davka melechet keva asru chachamim b'otan hasha'ot, aval melacha ara'it mutar lasot." Okay, so that's what we've already said, and he gives examples. Lefichach, asur la'adam levatzeh b'otan sha'ot avodat nagalut, woodwork, chayatot, sewing, chashmal, electricity, right, fixing things, avodot gdulot begina, going out and doing great planting things in your garden, avodah b'machshev, certain, again, depending on what precisely the activity is, but he talks about on computers, ktivat stam, right, writing a Sefer Torah, for example. Kol elu avodot kvuot. These are all fixed activities. Aval mutar lemumche levatzeh pa'ula ktsara. If one is in one's field of expertise to do something small, which doesn't take is not going to require a large amount of time and effort, he says, for example, somebody who's a trapper, just going to place a trap for animals, but it's not going to take you very long. You just place the trap there. Dyeing dyes to make paint. Right, you're on the computer, you're just writing in a line of code to make it set something in progress. Or types of work that don't require expertise. Watering the garden, just tidying up a room, sewing a button, washing, which we discussed last week, in a machine. Just writing notes to oneself by hand or by computer, not writing stam, right? Stam is in Sefer Torah, which requires expertise. Those sorts of things, all those things one can do, and that is fine. If these are activities which one receives payment for to do in a fixed manner every Friday afternoon, so then that's not appropriate. Okay, in the book, he talks about as well. Right. Okay. So we'll talk about that in a moment. If your regular job, you're saying to do your regular job and to stay on Friday afternoon. So just before that, one is that if something is, even if it's one of these activities, but it's for the sake of kavod Shabbat, so that would be permitted. So for example, see here, source 57. And that's even for pay. He says, Sapar Yisrael. Somebody goes to get a haircut on Friday afternoon. Everybody can see that the haircut is taking place. It's for the sake of Shabbat, and that is permitted. Okay, he writes here, number 58, the Mishnah Berurah talks about commerce, pragmatia. But really, you have a business or you have a store or selling goods, things like that, it's not needed for Shabbat. So he says, pragmatia shali, that's permitted. That the store should be closed a little bit before candlelighting time. So the first thing is, everybody would agree. It shouldn't be right until the last second before Shabbat. We said before, we're unfortunate here in Israel that it's not Friday, it's Erev Shabbat. But okay, so a person has a job they have to go to. First of all, should try and leave a little bit earlier. But where I think we have it here, it's referenced as well. One of the areas in halacha where this is compared to is the Isur Melacha of Chol HaMoed. On Chol HaMoed as well, we know there are certain leniencies, which is if it's going to be davar aved, somebody's going to lose out. Certainly, if a person is going to lose their job, if they're not able to go, then they are allowed to work if that is required. Same thing, if a person has a job and every Friday, if you ask which should you take off, Friday or Shabbat, so clearly you should take off Shabbat, right? Friday afternoon you can go and work. This is again, in Chutz La'aretz, this is one of the big questions that comes up, and it's a big problem. People have a limited amount of holiday days, and it's unlike in Medinat Yisrael, where our national holiday days are based on the Jewish calendar. There's a problem with that is that every day that we have off is Shabbos and Yom Tov, so you don't really have off in that sense. But I think last week we mentioned Yom Shabbaton, but so in Chutz La'aretz, when you have an extra day, you have Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiot in the first place. So you have to make sure you take off all the days for Yom Tov and Yom Tov Sheni and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, etc. So sometimes there aren't days left for Chol HaMoed. So a person has to work those days. If a person has the option, and you would ask, should you rather take off days of Chol HaMoed or Stam, whatever it is? So that should be the first priority, not to work those days as well. But yeah, so bottom line is, if a person just their regular job or whatever it is, Friday afternoon, if they need to work, they can work. It's possible to take off a little bit earlier, so one should. And certainly time-consuming activities, things that are going to require expertise, big projects, Friday afternoon is not the time to start doing that. Just mention briefly the idea of traveling on Erev Shabbat. The Gemara does mention that a person on Erev Shabbat shouldn't walk more than a distance of 3 parsaot, which is actually not that far, about 12 kilometers. What's interesting is that the reason the Gemara gives over here is not what we might expect. The reason it gives is because if you're going too far, people aren't going to know that you're traveling, that you're arriving at them for Shabbat, and they won't have the food prepared for you. Have a look at the Shulchan Aruch, source number 61. He says, "Ein ochin b'erev Shabbat yoter megimel parsaot." In order that you can don't travel too far, you arrive at home or wherever you're going to be when it's still early in the day, and you'll be able to prepare food for you, or others will know that you're there to prepare the food. Whether you're at your own home or somebody else's. If you would inform them that you're going to be there for Shabbat, so then you can travel further as well. However, what the poskim talk about now, this idea of traveling, obviously there's another consideration. If a person's going to travel too far or travel too late in the day, you may get stuck somewhere, and that leads to all sorts of problems and all sorts of questions, and therefore people should be careful in terms of traveling on Friday. Source number 63, the Mishnah Berurah. This is particularly relevant. There's always 1 week of the year, that week when you change the clocks, where suddenly it's only an hour, but it seems to be, Shabbos comes in half a day earlier. I don't know how it happens, but it's that 1 hour, and there's always signs and announcements and telling people, make sure you plan your travels, make sure you leave early. Because people always leave late, people always get stuck, but that's how it goes. So it says the Mishnah Berurah 63, Ba'arbe achronim ra'iti shekatvu דמכל מקום צריך לזהר לכתחילה שלא ילך או ייסע סמוך לערב מפני שכמה פעמים נכשלים על ידי זה ובאים לידי חילול שבת. So this is not something new. Says the Mishnah Berurah over 100 years ago that already in the times of the Achronim, said people would walk, people would travel close to Shabbat and they would get stuck on the way. It can be very dangerous if one gets stuck in the way. Right? What do you do if you are stuck? That is a whole sugya in and of itself. But one should prevent that in the first place. He says, "Gam kama pa'amim yera davar de lo yagia lamalon or leveito mibod yom ad shechashecha mamash." You're on your way to an inn, to some lodging, to your house. You won't get there until nightfall. V'kama chilul Shabbat yesh. There's going to be a large amount of chilul Shabbat that will be caused in this way. V'hotzah v'achnasa v'yitzeh mechutz latchum shvitat behemto. V'lachen kol ze yasim adam lelibo. Person should take to heart. V'yimaher lishbot and go quickly, go early. In the days before Waze, with Waze this is a lot easier, but even that is not always accurate, especially when there's traffic jams and when you're on the road and the time goes up and up and up. But he says the Yetzer Hara is in full force. On Friday, a person's traveling, you could stop here and you could make Shabbat there. It says no, carry on, you'll get there in time. Maybe yes, maybe no. Says the Aruch HaShulchan as well. He says, just read the part in bold. Satan mekatreg b'Erev Shabbat, v'lachen yireh l'zayeh mo'od b'zeh v'schal kaful min hashamayim. He says it happens many times. The Satan comes along on Erev Shabbat. Is the time to tempt you, to sow discord, to sow. It's not by coincidence that Friday afternoon is a time that is very fraught. There's a lot of tension. I don't remember who said it, but somebody said that Friday afternoon, if you think about it, this is the time when Adam and Chava were banished from Gan Eden. This is the time when the Yetzer Hara has a certain ability, a certain dominion, maybe we could say, whatever it is. But it's a time that is fraught, and a person should be careful and not add in unnecessary complications as well. So therefore, if a person is traveling, one should take it into account. Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata, number 65, says, Mikom makom chayav adam letachnen et nesiato haytev. Should plan one's trip well. There's always something unexpected that happens on the way, so take that into account. There's an article here in English, Rav David Haver from Star K. He suggests that you should essentially take double the amount of time that you would need to make sure that you'll get there before Shabbat. Okay, but at the end of the day, a person should have common sense, should have seichel yashar. If you're going by train, or you're going by plane, or you're going by car, you know where you're going, you know that there's going to be traffic jams. You should take that into account and do whatever possible so as not to be in a situation of chilul Shabbat or svei chilul Shabbat, etc. Okay, now that we're finished preparing for Shabbat, we are going to go on to. We continue chronologically. The next topic we'll be talking about, and we could talk about this for a long time, but we'll just do 2 shiurim, maybe 3, which is hadlakat nerot, the halachot of lighting candles. Who lights candles? Where do they light candles? Why do they light candles? Can you use electric lights to light candles? What do you do if you don't have candles, etc.? So that will be the next shiur will be on Sunday, Sunday morning at 10 a.m. This coming Sunday. Yeah. So I think it will be upstairs because I think there's something else going on here downstairs. So. If we're not here, we'll be upstairs. Then Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, and we'll resume from there. Okay.
Thank you.
You can't see me. Bye, everyone.